So my name's Nadine. My pronouns are she, her. I am the Community Connections Coordinator here at the Zebra Center, and I've been there for about 5 years or so. I started off as a volunteer, and I just loved the mission and vision so much that they couldn't get rid of me, and I started as staff about 2 years ago. So with that, I do appreciate your willingness to learn about child abuse. I know it's a topic that isn't always spoken about in our everyday, so please take care of yourself. I know that triggers come in many different forms, so if you need to tune out for a little bit, that's okay. I'm not offended. I usually like to keep things light and informal because it's such a heavy topic, so if you have any questions, feel free to yell them out. I know there's a microphone somewhere, but everything is pretty informal with me. All right, so with that being said, I'm going to start off with a video, and it's called Kids Can Tell. So it started about 4 years ago where we put this video together to give an overview about the Zebra Center. You can see why people have come to the center and what they've experienced, and then I will go more into what we do. So there's some sensitive topics there, so again, some trigger warnings. Take care of yourself. I will have some resources at the end, so you don't go home feeling too heavy. All right, so video whenever you're ready.
When I was little, I thought houses were where you went to be safe, because that's where families live.
Why won't you be quiet? Shut up, shut up, shut up!
And where strangers can't get to you. Where nothing bad happens.
Able to have a beer? I'm just trying to relax. What are you even talking about?
Emergency.
He's hurting my mom!
Who is?
My dad!
What are you doing with that?
But now I'm 10, and I know that isn't true anymore.
Shh, you don't have to tell anyone. This will be our secret.
I need a place that's safe, where bad stuff doesn't happen. A place where I can tell without being afraid.
So about 1 in 3 Canadians.
Know your zebras.
That's
know
our
your
other
safe
video.
People. Zebras are safe people.
I could act it out for you, but I'm not that great. We do have a YouTube channel, so that's one of the videos that we show to elementary students. So it's cartoons, so it's really fun for them to watch, and it really just tells kids about who their safe zebras are and how to identify them and the different types of safe zebras that are out there in their life. So again, that's on our YouTube page. But like I was saying, about 1 in 3 Canadians have experienced a form of child abuse. So it's a lot more common than we think, and these horrific crimes are happening in our community. But the more we talk about them, the more we can bring it to light, and the more people are willing to talk about it and become those safe zebras for these kids. So our mission at the Zebra Center is to support children and youth through the investigative, the justice, and the healing process of child abuse. So before the Zebra Center existed, if kids had a story of abuse, they would have to go through a very adult system. So maybe they might be telling their story multiple times to many different professionals and different adults. And when they got to the point where they needed to talk to police members about what happened to them, they would be brought to police headquarters. If you haven't been to police headquarters, here are a few pictures. It's not very warm. When I talk to some students or post-secondary people who have gone to headquarters, one of the words that they use to describe it is scary and intimidating. So we have kids who may be the age where they can read, and so they can read signs that say major crimes or sexual assault, and that can be very intimidating. So in these rooms, there's police officers who are walking around in their uniforms. Maybe they have their holsters in or their guns in their holsters, and sometimes when you're at a child height, that's the first thing you see. And sometimes there is that stigma and different perspectives about the police that kids and families may have. So seeing that, they might start to feel very vulnerable and scared to tell their story of abuse. But before they start their story there, they would have to wait in public areas, so on literal concrete chairs, where the public may see who they are and can identify them. And then when they are telling their story to a detective or a police member, they would be going into these very dull rooms where the suspect might also be telling their story at a later time. So if we're using that type of room to talk to the suspects, we don't want the kids to feel like they're in trouble either. So we thought that there's something better for these kids. So we had some police members and Crown prosecutors and children's services all come together and decided to create the Zebra Center. So since 2002, we've existed, so we just celebrated our 20th anniversary. But since then, there's been 28 established or emerging child advocacy centers all across Canada. So there's about 9 in Alberta, and we all collaborate to make sure that wherever kids go, they have the same level of support if they have experienced abuse. So like in the video, the first thing that we see when you step off our elevators is this mural. So a local artist actually came by and painted it for us, and it's called "You've Got This." So even from the first moment they come to the Zebra Center, we want to make them feel that they're supported, they're believed, and they're safe. So they do have a private waiting room, so they wait in that room with a non-offending caregiver, and they get assigned a child advocate. The child advocate is there to provide that support and build that rapport so that whenever they are introduced to the person that's interviewing them for their forensic statement, it's that warm handoff, and they're not incredibly scared to tell their story. And sometimes we do have our furry coworkers join us, and they're able to comfort families and kids whenever they're waiting in the room. And in that bottom picture, that is Fletcher, and he's actually supporting during a forensic interview. So they're trained to not be a distraction. Okay, so does anybody know how the Zebra Center got its name? There was an almost hand. Yeah.
I think I know. I think when the young zebras in danger, the adults will form a ring around it. Sort of this is such a beautiful organization. They form a ring around the young zebra to camouflage and keep it safe.
That is exactly it. I do these presentations and no one has ever gotten the exact answer before. So congratulations, I will get you a zebra at some point. So to those who haven't heard her answer, we are called the Zebra Center because when in the wild, whenever there is some type of danger, a herd of zebras will surround the young and vulnerable so that the predators don't know where one zebra starts or one zebra ends, and all the stripes blend together. So with all of our multidisciplinary partners, we create those stripes. So we surround the youth and children so that they're safe. So with that being said, we do take pride in our multidisciplinary team. We have quite a few partners that are on site with us, but we also have partners that are off site. So we do have police partners that take up quite a bit of room in our center. The Edmonton Police section, Edmonton Police Service, they have their child protection section that works out of our office. So all of these detectives have their offices just down the hall from us, and the child at risk response team also works on site. So they are made up of social workers and police members so that whenever there is an emergency call that has anything to do with children, they're able to respond to that right away. On site, we also have our RCMP police partners. So they do a lot of great work with doing consultations and forensic interviews for all of the rural area within our area. I can't really describe where we are, but it's kind of all the way down to Red Deer and then all the way north up to Fort McMurray. So we cover a big part of Alberta. Again, there's 9 of us there, so we do collaborate with the other child advocacy centers as well. On site, we also have children's services. So those 6 assessors that are with the child at risk response team are through children's services, but we also have 2 that are strictly for forensic interviews. So they work on site, and majority of their day is just talking to kids. And then we also have Alberta Health Services that work on site with us, and they're through our trauma treatment service. So whenever they need any type of referral to counseling, then we can do that through Alberta Health Services. Now, Alberta Health Services is quite large, so we work with them off-site as well. So the Child and Adolescent Protection Center in the Stollery, they do a lot of the medical follow-ups and the medical assessments whenever kids need that. And they go straight to the Stollery, and if any kits and evidence is obtained, then they talk to our detectives. So off-site, we also have our Crown prosecutors. They do a lot of the work in the court process, and they primarily work in the courthouse, but whenever they have any interviews or meetings with children, then they would come to the Zebra Center so that there's that comforting place that they are familiar with. All right, we also work with victim services units. So like I said, our rural area that we work with is served by the RCMP, and sometimes we can't be there in every rural area, so the victim services help us in that sense by supporting the families there. And then of course, we have our Zebra Center staff and volunteers who pretty much hold it all together. So once our partners are taking care of all of the information for the investigative and criminal and justice system, then us as Zebra Center staff and volunteers, we kind of slow the process down and make sure that kids are being thought of first. Maybe we can slow things down and get this child a snack before they talk to a detective. Or maybe we can make sure that they don't run into the accused whenever they do have to go to court. So there's about 150 volunteers that work through the Zebra Center, and they are community members. They come with a whole bunch of different backgrounds, and they do a lot of work for us. So we're very grateful for our community. All right, so I talked about a lot of our human partners, which is great, but we also have our furry coworkers, and we call them our very important PAWS program. So we have 3 internationally accredited facility dogs who have been trained by Dogs with Wings, and they started their training at about 2 days old, and then once they do complete their training, after 2 years, they are placed with us. So there's a lot of research about how animals can help trauma and healing, and even in forensic interviews. So these 3 dogs, they can do work within families whenever they're waiting in our family rooms. They can also do work in the forensic interview because they can stay quiet with a few snores here and there. And then they can also work in the courthouse. So sitting on stand, sometimes you can't have that person with you because there might be some sort of influence. But these dogs, they don't really have that influence. They're just there for comfort. So they can sit on stand with children. So another really great story that I have about these dogs. I'm honestly a little biased because I have a dog at home and I share an office with one of our dogs, so got lots of stories. But the story that stands out the most is this little child, just a wee one. It was years ago, so the dog that supported them are retired, so that dog isn't working with us. They were coached to be afraid of police, to not talk to children's services, or tell anybody anything about what's happening at home. So we go through the process. She told somebody, so they're at the Zebra Center. They're doing this really good interview, and sometimes kids don't want to say anything, and you know what, that's okay. We don't force kids to tell their story. We encourage them to open up, but if today's not their day, then today's not their day. They can come back sometime, some other time. So this kid has the dog in the room with them, and they're petting the dog, and they're not budging. So the forensic interviewer goes to talk to their police partner to say, hey, do you have any other questions that I can ask this little one so we can get their story? And as they're trying to debate about some questions to ask, or maybe today's not the day for them to tell their story, you can hear on the monitoring camera that this child is telling the dog her entire story. So because it's recorded, this statement can be used as evidence. This statement could be used in court. So they do a lot of work. And this little kid didn't betray what their parents said to tell an adult or to tell the police or anything like that. They just told the dog. So that's one of the most impacting stories that I got about the dogs. Other than that, sometimes they stink up my office, but sometimes they also provide some help to staff, volunteers, and other partners when they're having a rough day too. So yes, they're here for the children and the families, but they're also here for the adults. Okay, so continuum of support. This is essentially the journey that children would take through the Zebra Center. So it's important to know that we're not a reporting source. So if there's any type of incident or any suspicion of child abuse, that needs to be reported to police or children's services, not the Zebra Center. But because we work with them, that gets forwarded to us and we start supporting them that way. So we talk about files that are reported every single day, Monday to Friday, and we decide what's the next best step for this child. So sometimes that's to bring the child in for their forensic interview where they have the opportunity to share their story of abuse. And with that being said, that's their first visit to the Zebra Center. That's where they first get to meet a child advocate. That's when they get to meet a dog maybe. And then from there, we continue to support them and support the caregivers by calling them once a month to give that information about what the investigation is, what's happening. And then maybe once charges are laid, that's when we start the court process. So the court process can get kind of intimidating. There's lots of big words. And when you're in a stressful situation, it's hard to understand what is needed of you and what the expectations are. So we're walking through that with families as well. We're explaining the different processes of court, explaining the big words and that they may not need to go to court for this specific court date, and that's okay. Maybe down the line, they receive a subpoena and children and their caregivers are needed to go to court. So that can get very intimidating as well. So we have our child-friendly court preparation lessons that we can provide where we can talk to kids at their level about what the courtroom looks like, who's going to be there, and talk about some testifying strategies, that you're allowed to ask for a break, you're allowed to say, I don't know, and we talk about some of the fears that they may have. So sometimes they're scared of who's going to be in the courtroom, they're scared who's going to see them, they're scared that no one will believe them. So we go over all those fears and we dispel them as best as we can. And at this point, Crown prosecutors are coming to the center to meet with them so that there's that familiar face before they go to the courthouse. So after court prep, our court accompaniments, volunteers, and staff can meet them there as well. So whenever they do go to court, they can meet the accompaniment that will be with them. So at the Edmonton Courthouse, we have child-friendly rooms. So those are private waiting rooms so that they don't have to see accused, or they have access to snacks that we provide. So we sit with them the entire day. Sometimes we run and get them lunch so they don't have any bump-ins. And then after court, we do a little debrief with them with the Crown Prosecutor. And then afterwards, that pretty much concludes our journey with them and their process. So then we would explore closing the file with them. Now, that doesn't mean that we're never going to talk to them again. That just means we won't be often calling them, seeing how they're doing. So at this step, we make sure all of the referrals that needs to be done are completed. So whether that's referring to community resources or financial benefits, or maybe staying informed, that's where we make sure that our families are set up for success. And if they do have questions down the line, our door is always open. So, okay, so into stats. So we are currently typing up some of our stats for 2022. So all the stats that I'm going over today are from 2021. Seems a little similar from 2021, so it's kind of on the same page. Okay. So in 2021, the majority of our files deal with sexual abuse. So that's about 60% of them. So that includes all sexual touching, invitation to touch, exhibitionism, exposure to pornography. And then 28% of the children that we've seen have experienced serious physical assault. So that might be broken bones, burns, bruises, any head injury or injuries that are not adequately explained. And then we have 1% that have witnessed any type of crime. So sometimes there's only one witness and it was a child, and that's the only person that we can talk to. So we want them to give their statement in a child-friendly space. And then other includes any type of crimes like abduction, internet crimes, human trafficking, and other miscellaneous things like that. So with these different categories, we are conscious that these don't always happen in isolation. So sometimes kids come to us and they've experienced 2 of these categories, or maybe all of them. So everyone has their own story and background, and we just want to make sure that they have that opportunity to share what they've experienced. So on average, we know that 86% of our children have known their offender. So most often it's someone in their family. So it might be their father, their grandparent, their sibling, or their babysitter. So last year, this is an updated number, we supported 4,272 kids. So that is an 11% increase from last year, 2021, where we supported 3,844 kids. So it just keeps increasing, because in 2020, we supported about 2,844 kids. So it just keeps getting more and more. So with this increasing files, it doesn't mean that there's more kids in our community who are getting abused. We don't find that that's the case. It's more likely that we are talking about child abuse more, and it's less stigmatized, that we are more likely to report it. So with that being said, these are the ages that we've supported. So we do support kids between the ages of 0 to 18. Most of the time, they have to be verbal to tell their story, and it all depends on their cognitive level as well. So if they are over the age of 18 and they're cognitively delayed and they're functioning at an 8-year-old level, we want to make sure that they're receiving services at that 8-year-old level as well. We started tracking like how our kids identify through their gender. So here we have 43% who have identified as male, 52% identifying as female, and non-binary at 5%. So looking at that, it's pretty across the board that child abuse can happen to anybody, regardless of your gender. So I mentioned earlier that we're not a reporting source. So most of our referrals come from our police partners, where Edmonton Police Service is our top referral source. And then really close up is our RCMP. So they're almost about half and half. And then we also get referrals from Children's Services and other organizations. So other organizations might include maybe military police, or sometimes it's the Internet Crime or Internet Child Exploitation Unit, and other things like that. So we do support outside of Edmonton and inside Edmonton. So again, that's within our catchment area that we follow along with the RCMP folks. Okay, so that's it for stats. So those of you who don't like numbers, we're done for that. So I do want to talk about consent. It's a very important topic for us at the Zebra Center. And I talk about consent at every single presentation. So consent is when boundaries are clearly communicated and permission is given before any activity. So that's including hugging, kissing, touching, and it can be expressed through words, body language, and conduct. So whenever we have holiday gatherings or family gatherings, it's really crucial to talk to kids about, you know what, if you don't want to hug your aunt, then that's okay too. It's okay to not want to hug right now. And even talking to our family members about that and how to talk about consent. So if someone is silent and doesn't respond, that doesn't mean they give consent. If someone is under the influence of any drugs or alcohol, or if they're being pressured, guilted, or bribed, then they also can't give consent there either. Consent is voluntary, informed, it's specific, it's sober, it's conscious and sober, kind of similar, and it's ongoing, so it can be taken back. So in Canada, the legal age of consent is 16, but there are very specific rules about consenting to sexual activity. Those that are 12 to 13 years old can consent to sexual activity as long as their partner is less than 2 years older than them. And then 14 and 15-year-olds can consent to sexual activity as long as their partner is less than 5 years older than them. So I know that's a lot more numbers, and I promised you there wouldn't be more, but still really important to know. But with that being said, with these ages, and I'm talking about 12 to 15 years old, and I'm talking about consent, that doesn't imply that these kids at these ages are supposed to be having sex. So that just means that we want them to be educated about what consent is and to empower them to communicate consent. But if there is any type of power or authority that someone has over someone else, then consent is illegal there as well. So, also sexual activity without any consent is always illegal, no matter what the age is. So with that being said, more things that we like to go over whenever we're talking to the community is how to identify child abuse, how to respond to child abuse, and how to report it. So things that you can look out for to recognize child abuse. These are some of the signs. So we know that each child can react differently to trauma. So things might not be as clear. So we do have physical red flags that you can keep an eye out for. So that's pretty obvious, like some broken bones, some bruises, especially bruises in some areas that are concerning, like your private parts or your belly or your neck and ears. Like that could be pretty concerning. Some emotional red flags could be a drastic change in a child. So maybe when, typically they're very outgoing and they want to tell you all about their day and all about what they did over the weekend, and then the next day they decide that they hide away from you, they don't want to tell you anything, and things like that. So some behavioral indications could also be acting out some incidences. So maybe something has happened to them that someone that they know has abused them, and then they're acting that out on Barbies, or they're acting that out with other peers. So I do talk about these red flags, but that doesn't mean that all of these red flags means that the child is being abused. It just means that you can have that open communication with them to ask what's going on. You know them best. If you notice a change in them, you can ask about the context and what's happening, but it's not your job to identify what is abuse. So when you're listening to stories of abuse, the most important thing is to listen. So we're there to let them tell their story in their own words and to let them tell you. So we know from our stats that kids hold on to secrets of abuse for an average of 3 years. So when they're finally ready to talk to someone, it takes a lot of courage to do that. So we listen to them, let them get it off their chest and let them share with you. So we want to respect their privacy. So if there's other kids around the room or if there's other adults, then we want to make sure that we have a private space for them to share their story with us. Control your reaction is another great thing to do. I know you care about these kids when they're telling you their stories, but if you start to get angry or start to cry, sometimes these young people feel responsible for how you feel. So we don't want them to clam up again and not want to share their story. So we just want to make sure that we're there to support them. We don't communicate any type of blame. Nobody asks to be abused. And I know that this one is a really big one, especially for our youth. If they're out drinking and partying with their friends and then they get sexually assaulted, we can't blame it on them because we know that their prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed yet. So they're not ready to make decisions like adults do. So we're not blaming them for drinking. We're not blaming them for what they're wearing. We're not blaming them that they got abused. We also avoid making any type of promises. We can't promise that people are going to go to jail. We can't promise that they're going to feel okay at the end of the day because they might not be. And you know what? That's okay. We can only talk about things that are in our control. And then at the end, we praise them for telling us because that takes a lot of bravery. It was 3 years of holding on to that secret maybe. So we want to thank them and tell them that we care about them and we want them to stay safe. So with child abuse though, as adults in Alberta, we do have that legal and moral obligation to report it. So any suspicion of child abuse or confirmed cases of child abuse needs to be reported to any policing agency or children's services. If it's an online crime, then we can go to cybertip.ca and you can report it there as well. Kids can also report. So Kids Help Phone has a way that you can go to chat with a therapist and they'll walk you through it. So although all adults of Alberta have that responsibility to report, kids are also empowered to report if they feel that they are ready to do that. So joining our herd is really easy. Even just listening to this right now and listening to me talk, you're part of our herd. Because the more we talk about child abuse, the more likely we are to report things and identify things and talk about it around the dinner table, although I don't expect that of you at all. You can also grow our herd by joining our staff, our partner positions, our volunteer pool. You can also help us with our fundraising because we are a nonprofit that we do have to fundraise for some of our budget. I know child abuse is not a topic that's regularly talked about. So take care of yourself. If things come up later on, that's normal. And again, take care of yourself.